morning and welcome to another edition of the Economy and Politics show, where we bring you key developments in the economic space as it affects the populace. Today we'll be discussing a very interesting topic. It has been a source of conversation since it was passed by the Senate. That's the Petroleum Industry Bill 2020. We'll be looking at the governance, fiscal, and investment implications for Nigeria from this landmark bill, which is expected to transform the oil and gas industry. We meet to have this conversation with Mr. Taiwo Oyedele. He's the fiscal policy partner and African tax leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Nice to have you, Mr. Taiwo. It's been a while.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Before we begin, let's give you some key economic updates that occurred last week. The House of Representatives concurred with the Senate by approving the federal government's request for $6.183 billion, which is approximately 2.343 trillion naira as external borrowing in the 2021 Appropriation Act. The Federal Inland Revenue Service last week reported that it realized about 650 billion naira revenue in June 2021. This, according to Executive Chairman Mr. Mohammed Nani, was the highest realized in a single month since the COVID-19 pandemic and under his tenure. And also, the leadership of the National Assembly met with the Minister of Budget, Finance and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, over the 2022 to 2024 medium-term expenditure framework, fiscal strategy paper. It was an opportunity to look at some of the key projections and the prospects for the MTF going forward. And those are some of the key economic updates from last week.
FCMB Business Zone is a robust one-stop online platform designed to help you run a more profitable business. Beyond visiting the Business Zone for useful resources and networking opportunities, you should consider signing up for a merchant account. With a merchant account, you can list your business services on the platform to reach a wider range of potential customers. You also get access to an escrow system that bridges trust between service provider and receiver. To sign up as a merchant, simply go to businesszone.fcmb.com, click on Sign Up at the top right of the page, choose the Merchant Sign Up option, complete the form, then click Submit. Check your email box and click the link in the verification email to finish the process. It's that simple. Don't have an FCMB account? No worries. You're automatically assigned the SME role once sign-up is completed. Once you open your FCMB account, you can change the status by clicking on Upgrade Profile on the left sidebar on your dashboard. For technical support, please send an email to smehelpdesk@fcmb.com. Sign up as a merchant on FCMB Business Zone today and get access to new opportunities to expand your business.
CMB, my bank and I.
And let's get down to our conversation for today. Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, this has been long overdue, over 2 decades since inception. Finally, has been passed by the Senate. Does this bring the prospect of improving governance in the Nigerian oil and gas sector, which has been the yearnings of analysts, experts, and even policymakers?
Yes. So the answer is yes. So the mere fact that for decades, 20, 30 years, we've not had any major reforms in the sector is an indication that things are not where they should be, especially given that the dynamics in that sector, almost changing by the day in terms of the future of energy, clean energy, renewable, and even the volatility and the risk issue everywhere. If you roll back to 20, 30 years ago, some finds in terms of oil reserve and gas reserves were not there at the time. So which also meant that in terms of competition, we're in a much better place, say 20 years ago than we are today. So things have evolved, but unfortunately, our legal framework around governance, around fiscal issues, around your host community, administration, and so on, haven't evolved as fast. So certainly having a new law, I know this is not a law as of yet because we still need the Senate and representative to harmonize and then send to the president for assent. But once this becomes a law, then it will give us a new regime that we can look into for improvements within the petroleum sector.
Yes, that's very important. As like you rightly said, improving governance, we've evolved. I mean, what has happened now is different from what occurred 2 decades ago. So it's very important that it evolves to the realities of the time. But I'd like to ask you around assessing the proposed NNPC ownership structure, which is outlined in the bill. One of the interesting things for me is the fact that it's creating the pathway for it to be listed, leveraging deposits in the capital market as a cooperative company. But also the Southern Governors Forum had their concerns in terms of the ownership, licensing process, amongst others. They felt that this should be managed by the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. What's your take in terms of the proposed NNPC ownership structure? Is this going to make the state oil company much competitive like the ones that we have, like Saudi Aramco, Petrobras, or even Petroleum Mexico, Pemex?
Yeah, so maybe if I just link this to your first question around governance. One of the major issues we've had historically with the petroleum sector in Nigeria has been the governance aspect, especially because you have the NNPC, who on one hand is an operator, and on the other hand is also the regulator. And it is not the most efficiently run organization, even in Nigeria, let alone talking about across the world. So I think it's instructive to remind ourselves like that the likes of Aramco, which is clearly the #1 energy company in the world by a mile, didn't start, being a government-owned entity. So it was actually at the time, Aramco, by the way, used to be Arabian American oil company with some investment in California at the time, and it has evolved over time. At some point, it was owned less than 60% by government. It became 60% owned, and then became 100% owned, and then a couple of years ago, they sold, a couple of percentages in the interest to the public. But the point is, in that evolution, they have retained the efficiency, the capacity, and the appointment based on who can deliver. And there's a model like that in Nigeria as well. So if you compare the Nigeria LNG with the NNPC, it's light and darkness apart in terms of being efficiently run, even though NLNG is also run by Nigerians. So one of the things that the PIB is going to introduce is separating that regulation aspect from being an operator. So you're going to have NNPC Limited that will no longer be a regulator, but an operator, and then you have the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission that is going to be responsible for the upstream petroleum sector. And then you're going to have the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority that will be responsible for the midstream and the downstream operations. So this in itself is good because those bodies also are then accountable to the petroleum minister. So having those kind of controls and balances is a good first step. But it still doesn't solve the fact that even if you create an NNPC Limited and you allow politics and political interest to prevail over competence and ability to deliver, you're going to end up with the same outcome. So it's important that we have the framework. It's even more important that we have the right people to lead. There was a time that the NNPC had 6 DMDs in 6 years or 7 years.
Yeah.
You can't accomplish a lot with that. Now, the new structure that is being proposed under the PIB, once it becomes PIA, is going to give us NNPC Limited, which at first will be owned by the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, as well as the Ministry of Petroleum Incorporated, on behalf of the Federation. So which means the federal government will own it. It's going to be registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission. Federal government will own it on behalf of the federation, because this is something that belongs to the federation, not just the federal government. Now, what that does is, because it's now going to be a company under KAMA, it paves the way for government to then sell part of the shares to the public. We expect that will be a sale to Nigerians and not to foreigners, for example, and not to politicians.
We hope so.
Or the few. Yes.
Yeah.
So that is the expectation, which overall is good. We should get to a point where NNPC Limited, in whatever form it turns out to be, will not only be doing well in Nigeria, better than, say, NLNG, because it controls more assets and resources than NLNG. There was a time NLNG was bailing out government, billions of dollars being paid in dividend and all that, and even taxes. We need to get NNPC to be bigger than that and begin to make investments even outside Nigeria. It should be an integrated oil company that is adding value significantly to the economy and creating wealth for the Nigerian people.
Okay, that's the goal, and we hope that these kind of things will take effect. The NNPC playing big. You said Saudi Aramco. I mean, it's nice to get those orientation. At least Petrobras, in its whole structure too, like you said, was able to bring this efficiency, even to the point that where there were issues of corruption allegations, it was brought to the fore and it was addressed squarely. So we hope that, I'm hopeful that Nigerians, the whole NNPC Limited structure will leverage the market so that shares can be given to Nigerians, and that's wealth creation. That's also deepening the Nigerian capital market ecosystem. But let's go to another very interesting conversation, which has to do with the Host Community Development Fund. The onset of the PIB as developed by the hard work and, of course, dedication of the former petroleum minister, late Dr. Iwanu Lukman, was also anchored on the host community. And over time, as it evolved, like you said, the focus was still mainly the host community because they are critical in the whole ecosystem. We've seen that there's been variations. The Senate has proposed 3%, the House of Representatives has proposed 5%, and even the Southern Governors Forum rejected the 3% from Senate and said it's 5% that they will go for. Some others have gone as far as saying 10%, but as a fiscal policy expert looking at the whole ramifications, what are the new great opportunities for the host community on oil producing communities in the country in terms of this SCDF structure?
Yes, so this has been a major issue in Nigeria for many years. Initially, it wasn't like that. There was peace between the operators and the host community. I have to say that from my point of view, the issues we are having today is first and foremost a failure from the part of government. Because as much as corporate responsibility and taking care of your community and environment is important for every organization, you shouldn't have to get to a point where you're having to legislate it, right? The reason why government can decide what tax rate they want to collect, and in the petroleum sector, it could be as high as 85%, is that government is able to collect as much as they want, and then they can apply that to take care of the community. But government has failed in that. We set up the NDDC, and it's the same story of corruption and inefficiency and waste, no meaningful impact, despite the significant amount of money that has been contributed to NDDC. So when you put all of that together, you find that we end up with a situation where the oil companies have to think about what to do, and the communities are unhappy because they could see their resources being exploited with little benefits to them. Some of them, and many of them, have lost their means of livelihood because they could no longer farm, they could no longer fish, and all of that. So it's a problem that needs to be solved. But the question is, how best do you do it? If you say 10%, bear in mind that this 10% is not 10% of profit. Yeah. It is 10% of costs. So which means you're increasing the cost of production. If you raise that too high, then Nigeria becomes uncompetitive, which means they would just stop investing. We already saw from the report by the OPTS that out of about $70 billion investment that came into Africa over the period of 2015 to 2019, we only attracted about 3% or 4%, which is about 3 billion. So this is an indication for us that you cannot continue to think that you operate in isolation. You are not an island to yourself. Venezuela has more oil than we have in Africa. Nobody is investing in Venezuela. So at the end of the day, it's not just about having oil. You have to make sure that the enabling environment, the fiscal term, and all the other things that come with it make it attractive to investors. So having said that, I do think that the 3% by the Senate, the 5% by the House of Rep needs to be harmonized. Maybe they need to land at 4%, but I don't think that 10% is the right thing to do because it will make those investments very unattractive. So having said that, also I'm pleased with the governance process in the PIB to manage these funds, even though I have my concern around if the investment is, if you have an operator with very small investment in a host community, and you have to set up a fund, you have to set up a trustee, a governance board, and a management committee, and the whole money you are contributing is small. So at the end of the day, you may find that you can't do anything that is reasonable. But overall, it's a good development. People should take away the sentiments and the politics. So saying that the amount is not enough, it has to be 10%, and comparing it with the 30% for Frontier Fund, and it's not apple and apple, it's mangoes and oranges that we're comparing. So a percentage of profits is expected to be a lot lower than a percentage of operating costs because this sector is highly capital and operation intensive in terms of cost. So anything to ensure that there's peace, to ensure that development, and more importantly, sustainability, I think is good for the economy. Stakeholders having their different views is normal, but people just have to also take time to read the law, the bill as it is, try and understand it without any sentiments. So the southern governors, with their communique, for example, have issues with the ownership of the proposed ownership of NNPC. But my question is, so what are they proposing? If we don't want Ministry of Finance Incorporated and Ministry of Petroleum Incorporated to own it on behalf of Nigeria, who should own it? Are we going to create Governors Forums Incorporated?
No, they were proposing that the Nigerian National Sovereign Investment Authority, the NSI, should manage it into the Sovereign Wealth Fund, something like that, the accruables from the licensing and all this process.
Yes, but the role of the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund is different. It's for investment, right? So when you do Frontier, maybe many people don't understand it. We're just trying to look for more oil. There's no guarantee that you make money from it. So, but if you also don't make that investment, your reserve depletes. Every day that you produce oil, the reserve is depleting. It's not self-renewable, right? So you need to keep looking and investing so you can discover more reserve. That is not the role, unless you're going to change the setup of the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund. It's not, their role is very clear. They're to invest in structure, invest for the future and all of that. But I think those conversations are not the most important thing because today, if you think about it, who owns NNPC today, right? NNPC is a federal government corporation, even though it remits to the federation account, and that hasn't changed anything. What's important is the governance and the efficiency of that organization. NNPC, NLNG is not owned by state, right? It's not owned by a sovereign wealth investment fund, but it's doing extremely well compared to any well-run global organization, right? So we should shift our attention to how do you run these organizations efficiently. If NNPC Limited or NNPC as it is not profit making, even if you want to sell it to Nigerians will not buy. There's no Nigerian who is willing to lose their money just to feel like they own part of NNPC.
Wow, very clear insights. But let's look at the Frontier. You delved into it a bit, the Frontier Exploration Fund of 30%. A lot of like you said, there's need to clear some misconceptions. Are there some misconceptions you feel that needs to be cleared in that regard? There are concerns, particularly about the fact that this, when you talk of frontier exploration, operators, and then the axis of these operations come to play. And what are the implications of this? The concerns of the oil-producing communities, concerns of other stakeholders, and the operators too must be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I think it's first and foremost the lack of trust, and I think we should not shy away from it. There's lack of trust in Nigeria today between the citizens and people in the government. Even within government, there's lack of trust. Whether you're talking about subnational versus the center, sometimes you even find the lack of trust between the arms of government, between the executive and the legislature and so on. So these issues are there. So which means whatever you propose is first and foremost viewed with suspicion rather than the merit of your proposals. So if you think about it, the law says that the commission, and that's the upstream regulatory commission, would define what is frontier basin for this investment. But we know that essentially that would be the inland basin, and ranges from the Anambra basin to the southeastern one to the ones in up north around Sokoto, Bida. So at the end of the day, the reason why there's this so much objection is because people think this is to take money from the oil producing states and take it to the north. Yeah. So that misconception, I think, is misplaced in my view. So if you think about the composition of the regulatory commission that will make this definition, it's not from the north alone. So there's no way the north can then decide that. In fact, the PIB says the investment must be made in all the basins simultaneously. So you can't decide to do it in the north and not do it in, say, Anambra, for example. So at the end of the day, this is about investing. And the second important thing is that when you say a percentage of profit oil and gas oil, and this is not just all the profit, it's profit oil and gas oil from production sharing contracts, risk sharing contracts, service contracts. And it's not, so this is limited. So it's a much smaller base than the base for calculating the 3 or 5% in terms of the operating cost of the upstream and midstream companies that we invest in the host community. So we should be more concerned about this investment that we need to make, and how do we make sure that investment is indeed being invested wisely and not being padded, and no politics coming into it, and politicians, at the end of the day, when politicians want to take advantage of all of this, they will not even think about whether they are from the south or from the north. They will be united in stealing. So we should be watchful to make sure that the money is not stolen, is efficiently invested. That is a lot more important than whether the 30% is more or less than the amount you're giving to the host community. Because if you then find more reserve, at the end of the day, it means more money will be available to the federation, including the host communities.
So more reserves, more money to the federation account, but most importantly, ensuring that the place is not hijacked by politics, which has always been a challenge in the country.
FCMB Business Zone is a robust one-stop online platform designed to help you run a more profitable business. Beyond visiting the Business Zone for useful resources and networking opportunities, you should consider signing up for a merchant account. With a merchant account, you can list your business services on the platform to reach a wider range of potential customers. You also get access to an escrow system that bridges trust between service provider and receiver. To sign up as a merchant, simply go to businesszone.fcmb.com, click on Sign Up at the top right of the page, choose the Merchant Sign Up option, complete the form, then click Submit. Check your email box and click the link in the verification email to finish the process. It's that simple. Don't have an FCMB account? No worries. You're automatically assigned the SME role once sign-up is completed. Once you open your FCMB account, you can change the status by clicking on Upgrade Profile on the left sidebar on your dashboard. For technical support, please send an email to smehelpdesk@fcmb.com. Sign up as a merchant on FCMB Business Zone today and get access to new opportunities to expand your business.
FCMB, my bank and I.
Let's look at the future now. What do you see as implications of this if everything goes to plan? If it's passed also the House, and of course, the President gives his assent, and there's harmonization. What are the implications for investments in the oil and gas industry? And Mr. Tai, I wanted to put this in context as we see the issue of net zero investment in fossil fuels. I mean, just recently, there's an alliance of several financial institutions globally that are signing up to the net zero investment. So that speaks a lot to the oil and gas sector globally.
Yeah, no, very important issues actually. So when it comes to the implications for investments, we always have to look at this from the lenses of investors. So we can make all the noise, we can write all the laws that we like. At the end of the day, it will come down to investors doing their own analysis. They're going to do models, put numbers into them, and see whether this makes sense. One, is it profitable? Two, is it as profitable as other available investment options that they have, including in other countries? So there's nothing that says you have to invest in Nigeria. If you can invest in Angola and make more money. We also need to bear in mind that Nigeria also has some country-specific risks that you don't face in other countries, which means the risk premium that you expect is slightly higher for investment in Nigeria. When you take all of this into consideration, bear in mind that investors are just looking for profit. So what that means is, while under the current regime, the rate of PPT is as high as 85%, but you also have a lot of deductions and incentives and allowances, which means that your effective tax rate may not even be up to 50%. Under the PIB, the highest rate is going to be about 60%, combined hydrocarbon tax and companies income tax, all combined 60%. But there are also provisions in PIB that are discouraging to investment, like the cost price ratio.
Yeah.
So you're saying if your cost exceeds 65%, you cannot deduct it for tax, but you can't control that, right? If the price of crude oil per barrel goes down in the international market, there's nothing the oil company can do about it. So suddenly punish them again for making less revenue because they have incurred costs. So these things will increase the risk appetite, will reduce the attractiveness of the investments in the oil upstream sector in Nigeria for investors. And this needs to be taken into consideration. For example, also in terms of funding, PIB says if you are taking a loan, you must get the approval of the commission for you to get the interest on the loan. This is completely unnecessary because the Federal Inland Revenue Service already has transfer pricing regulation that ensure that you don't inflate the interest rates and you don't borrow when you don't need to. Asking a commission that has no competence in matters of transfer pricing to do the approval is an additional layer of administrative burden and that may end up creating more problems than solutions. Overall, I would say the PIB is an improvement in terms of attracting investment, but we need to bear in mind that we are not in isolation. We're within a global community where investment is fungible and people can take their money and pack their bags and go elsewhere. If they're already here and they're stuck with you, of course, they can't immediately leave, but they won't add additional dollar to their investment. And that, in the long run, is not good for us.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, the fiscal policy partner and African tax leader at the PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you very much for the perspective you brought on the governance, fiscal and investment implications for the PIB, Petroleum Industry Bill 2020, which has been passed by the Senate. It is very clear that the fiscal regime, there are key issues that need to be looked into to make it attractive. There are so many oil-producing countries that are opening up the space to attract investment. So Nigeria must make itself the sweet spot in investment destination, and the fiscal regime is very important. Thank you once again for this conversation. We hope to have you discuss further around fiscal matters in subsequent editions.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And that will be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics show. You can join our website, www.proshareng.com, and when you get onto the website, click on the right hand of the bar, scroll, click on oil and gas, and you will see latest stories, including what the PricewaterhouseCoopers has written, giving the implications of the PIB 2020 sign passed by the Senate, and also all the articles around the PIB and the oil and gas industry is captured in that segment in the ProShare website. You don't want to miss the rich contents that we have in the industry. Also, you can send your questions, views, and comments around this conversation, the fiscal regime, the governance, and the investment implications on PIB. If you need further clarifications around it, send your views and comments to otobasi.obasekong@proshareng.com, and also follow our social media platforms displayed on the screen. Don't forget this period that you need to stay safe. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.